of all of us, where our faith and love begins. You should reach to find the truth in love. The answers there within. Oh, I know that life can make you feel it's much harder than it really is. But we'll get through it. Just don't give in. Oh. When you're weak, helping you to carry on. I'll be there, don't be afraid. Please believe me when I say, count on, count on, count on, count on me. Ooh, you can count on me. Oh, yes, you can.
Hey, my dear people. My name is Kokyu. I'm very grateful to be here with you all at Holy Ground Spiritual Center. I simply want to say thank you to Reverend Melissa McQueen for allowing me to share space with you all today. And I want to begin by having just a moment of silence or a reflection, a meditation. It's going to be very brief. Just allow us to connect to our breath, land in our bodies, so that we can be present with each other at this moment. And so I am going to strike this 3 times to begin our time of reflection, our time of silence together. And maybe take one more deep breath through your nose and release it through your mouth. And when you feel comfortable, you can open your eyes and see my beautiful face and smile. I want to start by reading a quote from someone that I have been studying in a very intentional and heavy way. His name is Jiddu Krishnamurti. I began studying him some years ago when I heard Bruce Lee mention him in a conversation. I am also a martial artist, and deeply studied kind of martial philosophy and thinking. I particularly studied Kung Fu, and have studied Aikido. And there is something about the writings and thinking of Jiddu Krishnamurti that constantly lands on my heart, and sometimes even my own desires of what I would want for the future, or more so what I would want to incorporate in my own body and experience and practice. And so I want to read this quote as we continue together. And it reads, "When I understand myself, I understand you, and out of that understanding comes love. Love is the missing factor. There is a lack of affection, of warmth in relationship, and because we lack that love, that tenderness, that generosity, that mercy in relationship, we escape into mass action, which produces further confusion, further misery. We fill our hearts with blueprints for world reform and do not look to that one resolving factor, which is love." So I took that deep breath because the concept that I was asked to speak of, or the theme that I was asked to speak on today, is something that I am constantly reflecting on. This concept of justice, this idea of justice, this even practice of justice is something that I am often writing about, thinking about, learning to embody in my own body, because it seems very layered and complicated to me, because we live in a society that functions, that breathes, that has sustained itself through deep and constant violence. And so I can hear many individuals suggesting that that is a pessimistic approach. And I don't see that at all. Yes, in life in general, there's joy, there's happiness. All of these things exist at once. And our country as is would not be if it wasn't for blood. And so to begin to talk about justice seems very interesting to me. But to talk about love feels more applicable. Justice to me feels like a kind of collective and communal activity. Love feels like something that can spring out of individuals. And that practice of love demands or requires that one have the courage to deeply reflect on themselves, to see themselves as they are, and then choose to practice a way of being together that is undermining the violence that we find ourselves in socially and politically. And so I often have this constant question of what is justice in our society? Is justice a legitimate conversation? Which I would say it is. And I think the question that arises to me is, how honest are we about what justice, if justice is going to be a legitimate conversation, what it requires from each of us? So I've been arrested. I've protested for years. I've participated in many things, like demanding a change in our society, and also deeply believing that those practices make a change. I know I have questions about to what it actually means. And maybe I'll never truly understand it, and that is not something that I pursue constantly. But if justice is actually a thing that exists, I mean, that's a question. Does justice exist? Does justice exist? But if justice is actually a thing that exists, I know that it begins with a kind of deep love that I wonder if human beings collectively are capable of participating in. And I'm not suggesting that it is our fault. I'm not trying to place the blame on anyone. But it does require a kind of reflection on ourselves, to see ourselves as we are, and to fall in love with the shadows and the shit that we find when we investigate ourselves. And then to participate in that kind of love and grace in public. And so this leads me to various other conversations. So when we talk about racial justice, what does it mean to use our anger, our rage, our frustration in society? And to also not to blame particular bodies for it. Now, this doesn't erase, at least to me, this doesn't erase that we have a fucking problem, that we have many problems in our society. But it is to say that I don't know if, actually I do. Justice cannot begin to take form in a society where blame and judgment are at the center of building a justice-filled world. Judgment and shame cannot sustain justice. It cannot happen. So that it shifted the entire way, or it is shifting the entire way that I think about this thing that we speak a lot about called justice, that I just don't know if we collectively have sat with what it actually means for us to call out for justice in the world, to call upon a God. So I'm someone that went through seminary and actually got another master's degree to study liberation theology. And I would not be a Buddhist, which is very interesting, if it wasn't for my studies in liberation theology. I would not be a Buddhist today. Because what liberation theology did for me, what womanist theology constantly does for me, what feminist theology, these theologies that are thinking with or thinking about God from the standpoint of those on the margins of society? Is it nudged me to experience life in my own body in different ways? Because there's particular ways that I myself carry privileges that I would often deny because I'm Black. I come from a working class family and watched my mother struggle and then greatly succeed at providing for her family economically. And also watched her struggle through her own emotional struggles. And I never really took the time to sit with the particularities of what that meant and the things that I didn't have to experience because I'm a man. But I watched my mom have to navigate those things. It didn't, till years later, me looking back upon her experience, at least from my own eyes, and to see that there's some very particular things that were just different. And not because of her work ethic or anything like that. It was just simply because it was a lot easier for me to navigate through certain spaces, particularly the Black church. We can talk about that another day. And so I'm a better Buddhist because liberation theology taught me that those experiences are included in life. And if I'm going to begin to talk about justice, if I'm going to begin to talk about my own healing, I have to be able to look at those experiences and include them in how I choose to engage life. And it's interesting that I kind of went on that sharing, because that is exactly why I have deep questions about what do we actually mean collectively when we speak of justice. Of course, I mean, I've heard various definitions of what justice is, and there's also ways in which people that are just triggered in their own experience begin to kind of exploit the language of justice. And if we slow down for a moment, and I want to be very careful about how I say this, simply because I can imagine people will have something to say, and in some ways I actually don't give a damn. But in some ways I do, because I want to be clear. I often hear people speak about how emotions don't matter when it comes to the public, social, political sphere, or the way in which we relate. I have to say that I think that's complete bullshit. Because our triggers are developed from ideas that were created prior to our own existence. Our triggers come from something that we have accepted by choice or not by choice inside of our bodies that were passed down to us from our ancestors, whoever our ancestors are. And so that feels like that it is necessary for us to be able to reflect on people's emotional state, emotional struggles and tensions, for us to even begin to know how to talk about what justice is, unless we're simply talking about these hierarchical structures that we maintain, where certain groups take over historically. And I'm not interested, and will never be interested in that kind of process. I mean, I think it's easy. And so like throughout human history, that's what we have done, is certain groups take over, and then like it just continues. And so this is not about like not holding people accountable. This isn't about not speaking the truth, whatever the fuck that is. But it's more so about like us being very gentle and loving, even when our rage comes up. And I'm not saying get rid of our rage, because our rage is necessary. I mean, for some reason, Lama Owen's book called Love and Rage is coming up at the moment, and if you haven't read it, I think it's necessary, or I think it's important. And I'm not saying get rid of our rage, but I'm saying being very aware of our rage so that we can use it in the healthiest way possible for our futures, if we're going to talk about hope at all, which I don't find those conversations helpful. And that's just me. But back to this concept of justice that I am constantly wrestling with. And I want love to be, and this is my own agenda and my own framing, that if love isn't at the grounding of how we begin to think about justice, and I'm speaking about love for ourselves first, primarily, and then the way in which that love spills over into our community, our families, and so forth, is the only way, in my own take, that that hope is a possibility, that hope has possibilities. Love is the place. Tenderness is the place. Of course, there's violent and terrible things that have happened to all of us, and some, I would say, more traumatic and painful than others. But if we simply continue to take that trauma, that pain, rage, and then to dump it out on society, in our families, and those that we love the most, and then I don't see justice or hope in any of it. All I see is a continual circle of violence and pain that will never stop. And within the Christian tradition, if that isn't hell, I don't necessarily know what is. So justice must be, in my view, must be grounded in this practice of love that says, yes, I am rageful, I am angry, I am mad as fuck, and I am going to sit with my rage. I'm going to become very clear inside of my upset, my frustration, my trauma, about how it impacted me, the pain or experience that I'm having, how it impacts me. And become so quiet inside of that experience that then, and I think only then, whatever practice you have to do, sometimes I have to go to the gym. Sometimes I have to go take a walk before I engage people. I have to become very clear within my own experience. Become very clear within my own experience so that I then can practice something that is just something else. And it's come up, and even in my family recently, I have heard from family members that they really appreciate how I take, and this is not always true, so I'm not putting myself on a pedestal. I just want to be be very clear. There's times where I lose my shit. But what is very true for me is that the way in which I do my best to engage places where I become angry or upset has shifted. And I may do some weird stuff. I take these huge deep breaths in between moments before I respond. I take my time, and I don't actually give a damn about how people think I should respond immediately at this moment, in 2 days. And whenever I choose to respond, I will respond, and I'll communicate that. And I'm lifting that up simply because these places that we engage each other with our families and our loved ones are the perfect practice ground for building any possibility for justice to exist. If we can't begin to love ourselves in gentle and graceful ways and see ourselves even in our bullshit and fall in love with our shit, and then allow ourselves to do that, in our most intimate relationships, in our work environments, in any relationship that we encounter. If that practice isn't developed, which I don't think collectively human beings have done well with that, I simply find no use or even any purpose in conversations about justice and even love. And I have some deep sadness around that, because that feels like closer to reality to me. That human beings don't do well. And I historically have not done well with being very careful with myself and loving myself in such a way that I have sovereignty over how I choose to show up in the world. Yes, I've been mistreated because I'm black. I've been mistreated because I'm a big black man. I've been mistreated for various other reasons as well. And I choose not to give other people that power for me to show up in a way that is a reflection of the society that I live in. I have a fuck no for that. I choose to show up with myself and others in the ways that I want to show up with them. And that is deeply committed and grounded in love. And it is not always, because I still got work to do. But then in those moments, allow myself to have grace for myself, to have the courage to apologize, and to also have the courage to get up and try again tomorrow. That feels like the place where justice can begin to flow through our world in those very intimate moments with ourselves, and those very intimate moments with those that we love and that we live with and live around. That feels like the place. I hope my words today have landed on your heart in some ways. For the stuff that doesn't land, throw that shit in the trash. My name is Kokyu. If I can support you in any way, please reach out to me. I love you, and I hope y'all have a beautiful day. Peace and love.